Hello and welcome to Emma's ESL English. Today I want to read a little something for you. Many of you, if you have listened to this channel for any time at all, will have heard me say, don't panic, quite a few times. This is partly just a thing that I say a lot, but it does actually come from somewhere. There is actually a pop culture reference here. If you've been around since the beginning, you may know what that pop culture reference is. Today, I'm going to read you a little bit from that pop culture reference, and that is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Superb book. Douglas Adams, we lost him far too early. This book started off as a crazy idea that he had. It then became a radio program, and the BBC radio program, they spent much more than their budget. It was extremely expensive because they did so many sound effects for the show. And eventually, after the radio show, he turned it into a book. It eventually became a movie and more books. If you want a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, this is not the book for you. It's rambling. It goes on forever. There's like no satisfactory ending. It goes on forever. But it's wild. It's a wild ride. There's a lot of crazy characters. It's very much British humor. So I'm going to read you a little bit from this book. This is right at the very beginning of the book. And what has happened is that Arthur Dent was living on planet Earth and his house was being knocked down. And he was very upset about it. And his best friend, Ford Prefect, said, "Don't worry, mate. The end of the world is happening today. In about 2 minutes, you'll be fine." And then he was whipped off the planet. So now Ford and Arthur are sitting on a spaceship. Ford and Arthur stared around them. "Well, what do you think?" said Ford. "It's a bit squalid, isn't it?" Ford frowned at the grubby mattresses, unwashed cups, and unidentifiable bits of smelly alien underwear that lay around the cramped cabin. "Well, this is a working ship, you see," said Ford. "These are the Dentrassi's sleeping quarters." "I thought you said they were called Vogons or something." "Yes," said Ford. "The Vogons run the ship. The Dentrassis are the cooks. They let us board the ship." "I'm confused," said Arthur. "Here, have a look at this," said Ford. He sat down on one of the mattresses and rummaged around in his satchel. Arthur prodded the mattresses nervously and then sat on it himself. In fact, he had very little to be nervous about because all mattresses grown in the swamps of Squorncellus zeta are very thoroughly killed and dried before being put into service. Very few have ever come back to life again. Ford handed the book to Arthur. "What's this?" said Arthur. "The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's a sort of electronic book. It tells you everything you need to know about anything. That's its job." Arthur turned it over nervously in his hands. "I like the cover," he said. "It says, 'Don't panic' on it. It's the first helpful or intelligible thing anybody said to me all day." "I'll show you how it works," said Ford. He snatched it from Arthur, who was still holding it as if it were a 2-week dead lark, and pulled it out of its cover. "You press this button here, you see, and the screen lights up, giving you the index." A screen about 3 inches by 4 lit up, and the characters began to flicker across the surface. "You want to know about Vogons, so I entered that name." So his fingers tapped some more keys, and there we are. The words Vogon Constructor Fleets flared in green across the screen. Ford pressed a large red button at the bottom of the screen, and the words began to undulate across it. Don't panic about the vocabulary. I'll put it all in the description. At the same time, the book began to speak the entry as well in a still, quiet, measured voice. This is what the book said. "Vogon Constructor Fleets. Here is what you do if you want to get a lift from a Vogon. Forget it. They are one of the most unpleasant races in the galaxy, not actually evil, but bad-tempered, bureaucratic, officious, and callous. They wouldn't even lift a finger to save their own grandmothers from the ravenous bug-bladder beast of trial without orders signed in triplicate, sent in, sent back, queried, lost, found, subjected to public inquiry, lost again, and finally buried in soft peat for 3 months and recycled as firelighters. The best way to get a drink out of a Vogon is to stick your finger down his throat, and the best way to irritate him is to feed his grandmother to the ravenous bug-bladder beast of Trow. On no account allow a Vogon to read poetry at you. Arthur blinked at it. What a strange book. How did we get a lift then? That's the point. It's out of date now, said Ford, sliding the book back into its cover. I'm doing the field research for the new revised edition, and one of the things I'll have to do is include the bit about how the Vogons now employ Dentrassi cooks, which gives us a rather useful little loophole. A pained expression crossed Arthur Dent's face. But who are the Dentrassis? He said. Great guys, said Ford. They're the best cooks and the best drink mixers, and they don't give a wet slap about anything else. And they'll always help hitchhikers aboard, partly because they like the company, but mostly because it annoys the Vogons. Which is exactly the sort of thing you need to know if you're an impoverished hitchhiker trying to see the marvels of the universe for less than 30 Alterian dollars a day. And that's my job. Fun, isn't it? Arthur looked lost. It's amazing, he said, and frowned at one of the other mattresses. Unfortunately, I got stuck on the earth for rather longer than I intended, said Ford. I came for a week and got stuck for 15 years. But how did you get there in the first place then? Easy. I got a lift with a teaser. A teaser? Yeah. What is, a teaser? Teasers are usually rich kids with nothing to do. They cruise around looking for planets that haven't made interstellar contact yet and buzz them. Buzz them? Arthur began to feel that Ford was enjoying making life difficult for him. Yeah, said Ford, they buzz them. They find some isolated spot with very few people around, then land right by some poor, unsuspecting soul whom no one's ever going to believe, and then strut up and down in front of them, wearing silly antennas on their head and making beep-beep noises. Rather childish, really. Ford leaned back on the mattress with his hands behind his head and looked infuriatingly pleased with himself. Ford, insisted Arthur, I don't know if this sounds like a silly question, but what am I doing here? Well, you know that, said Ford. I rescued you from the earth. And what happened to the earth? Ah, it's been demolished. Has it? Said Arthur levelly. Yeah, it just boiled away into space. Look, said Arthur, I'm a bit upset about that. Ford frowned to himself and seemed to roll the thought around his mind. Yeah, I can understand that, he said at last. Understand that? Shouted Arthur. Understand that? Ford sprang up. Keep looking at the book, he hissed urgently. What? Don't panic. I'm not panicking. Yes, you are. All right, I'm panicking. What else is there to do? You just come along with me and have a good time. The galaxy's a fun place. You'll need to have this fish in your ear. I beg your pardon, said Arthur, rather politely, he thought. Ford was holding up a small glass jar, which quite clearly had a small yellow fish wriggling around in it. Arthur blinked at him. He wished there was something simple and recognizable he could grasp hold of. He would have felt safe alongside the Dendrassi's underwear, the piles of Squanchelius mattresses, and the man from Beetlejuice holding up a small yellow fish and offering to put it in his ear, had he been able to see just a small packet of cornflakes. But he couldn't, and he didn't feel safe. Suddenly, a violent noise leaped at them from no source that he could identify. He gasped in horror at what sounded like a man trying to gargle while fighting off a pack of wolves. Shh, said Ford. Listen, it might be important. Important? It's the Vogon captain making an announcement on the tannoy. You mean that's how Vogons talk? Listen, but I can't speak Vogon. You don't need to. Just put this fish in your ear. Ford, with lightning movement, clapped his hand to Arthur's ear, and he had a sudden sickening sensation of the fish slithering deep into his oral tract. Gasping in horror, he scrabbled at his ear for a second or so, but then slowly turned goggle-eyed in wonder. He was experiencing the oral equivalent of looking at a picture of two black silhouetted faces and suddenly seeing it as a picture of a white candlestick, or of looking at a lot of colored dots on a piece of paper, which suddenly resolve themselves into the figure 6 and mean that your optician is going to charge you a lot of money for a new pair of glasses. He was still listening to the howling gargles. He knew that, only now it had somehow taken on the semblance of perfectly straightforward English. That's the Babel fish for you. Don't we all wish we had a Babel fish? I don't want a fish in my ear, but if it would help me understand all the languages in the universe, it sounds like a pretty good idea. So, don't panic. I will put all of the vocabulary in the description. I know there were quite a few big, unusual adjectives in there. There were also some random references to aliens. Obviously, the Vogons and Jondrasi are aliens. In addition, the mattress comes from a different world and is grown on the world. So that is also a piece of vocabulary that you never need to know again. Betelgeuse is a place where Ford comes from. It's a planet. I hope you enjoyed that. A little bit unusual. It's a great fun book. If you get a chance to read it, do. If you ever get a chance to listen to the original BBC radio show, do. It's fantastic. Some of the best radio ever. It's very, very entertaining. All right. I hope you enjoyed that. See you next time. Bye.